Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of the RLR podcast. Matt and I have a great show for you this week with some really interesting topics. So, let's go ahead and dig right in with a segment that we call Recharge. Matt, how are you this week?
Good. How you doing, my friend? What have you
Oh,
heard? How you doing? What have you heard what's been going on over the past week?
oh, well, like I said, we've got some interesting topics this week, and I think car news as a whole has been generally pretty interesting.
Yeah, and
Uh,
try some new stuff. I think should we not spoil that just yet for people? New
yeah,
potentially.
we are trying something just a little bit different this week, but they'll see that as we go on. Um,
Well, are you then to start off recharge here? Are you I'm not particularly a huge fan of the series, but are you a Star Wars fan?
I it's a difficult question, and I think that is for a lot of people. But no, I do enjoy the original trilogy. The prequels were okay, and I actually have never seen anything of the new trilogy. So
So I have because my late uncle is who you knew decently well. He was a big Star Wars fan, so I have seen the new stuff, the new Disney ones, old and news, and that was kind of something we would do together. And I asked a question because found something kind of cool over the this past week where fans of the series know I think Ewan McGregor, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, plays Obi-Wan, and apparently his brother, who I let me find his name so I don't say the wrong name. Hang on one second, my devices here are seeming to quit on me. But for those who are Star Wars fans, his brother, again, I can't find the name right now because for some reason things aren't loading, but he is a pilot, or at least was. I'm not sure how old this could be in the Royal Air Force, I believe. And his call, his pilot nickname or his call sign was essentially Obi-2 because of his brother being Obi-Wan and playing that character, which I just find kind of hilarious. You imagine,
well, and military
yeah,
call signs in general are just usually pretty fun. You know, I uh, I
is that
was
not one of the good like one of the really good ones though? Like that's
no
like
that
usually they
that's
name it first of all
fantastic
something you do
for
and
what it
like
is.
it's awesome.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I, even though usually number one's better than number two, I wouldn't be angry if my call sign was OB2 given my famous family, my famous brother. So
Yeah.
that was kind of cool. For those who are potential Star Wars fans. Yeah. So another thing, moving on down, another thing that we saw was some news about the VW Golf. Do you want to maybe
Yeah,
take
so
that?
the VW Golf, as many people know, both in and outside of the United States, is an extremely popular. I would say it's probably Volkswagen's most popular model across the
Oh,
world.
I would agree. Yep.
Um, the little uh, either two door or four door hatch. Um, it has sold
Fun van.
extremely well across the entire world.
hmm
Uh,
Which kind of makes it maybe a little bit surprising as to the news that we heard. So both some good and bad news. We're still keeping what the GTI, but this is the base model Golf,
yeah,
right?
so
That
the
we
base
saw
model
some news about.
Golf is now going away in the United States, at least, from what I can tell.
hmm
Um, so we are retaining the GTI and the Golf R, but we are not getting the base model Golf anymore. Which
That's interesting.
which we'll talk
I don't
about
know
in
why.
paddock chat, kind of the trends of vehicles in the United States. But
Mhm.
it does fall in line with kind of the trends right now, as far as
Yeah, I mean,
getting rid of it.
I would imagine that the only, I mean, frankly, obviously, the market drives, businesses make the decisions. So I'd imagine it's because of, probably lackluster sales compared to other models. But it's still surprising because it seems like kind of an era,
Well,
over,
and we saw
frankly.
the explosion of the Atlas this year.
Oh, yeah. I mean, heck, even I was trying to push my dad towards buying an Atlas for a while, frankly. So, I mean, yeah, it's. That goes along lines with the explosion of trucks and SUVs, and like so something we'll talk about later more in depth when we chat about it. But yeah, I think it's maybe a little bit of sad news, but I mean, they must know what they're doing. And the good news is we're keeping, it's just a base model. We're not missing all of the Gulf models. So here in the U.S. at least, which is good.
Right,
So
and we've talked about. I mean, we talked about it with when Zach was on the podcast, the whole hot
mhm.
hatch debate.
Yeah,
Um,
and yeah, and I maybe upset him a little bit with my opinions, but yeah, makes sense.
yeah, I think we ended that with to each their own. But
Yep,
uh,
absolutely. So yeah, I
yeah,
mean, it is what it is. Time changes, things evolve, and sometimes old things just aren't as needed as they might or as they were back in the day. Speaking of old things that aren't maybe needed, we had a little bit of an issue with a different kind of engine related thing we haven't talked about quite yet, being railroads. And apparently, you pulled this out to talk to me about it, right? Apparently, if I'm reading this correctly,
actually, I believe
and in
real quick, this was a viewer submitted topic that we
oh, well,
wanted to
then my
discuss.
mistake. I mean, I know nothing about it, but apparently, maybe you know a little bit more. An article was we saw over the past week where a railroad in China was completely in like halted, incapacitated, whatever, stopped because of Adobe Flash no longer being
Yeah,
supported.
so
How
essentially there was a section of I believe it was North China that their railroad system was running on Adobe Flash essentially. And I'm going to butcher the name so I apologize, but it was the city of Dalian in North China. Essentially fell apart when when Flash was no longer able to run on certain platforms anymore because they were running their entire city railroad system off of it. So the same Flash player that was used in the early days of Homestar Runner and free online casinos and things like breakout games, mortgage refinancing ads that you would get on the computer on the sidebar,
I
was
mean, like
also
everything, really.
was also running an entire railroad system in northern China, and when it died, so did the railroad. So,
Um, hmm. Wouldn't you think? I mean, I can't really speculate much on that, and why it was running Flash versus anything else. But I mean, I remember reading and knowing that that was going to go away. Over, like they made it known that Flash was no longer going to be supported. But wouldn't you think that as a railroad operator, you would take the necessary steps to make sure that you weren't out of service when that
well,
actually happened?
so, so when
Or start early, kind of
yeah,
thing.
so essentially what happened was for 20 hours, 20 hours, the railroad
That's a
network
long time.
ground itself to a halt, and I will let you take a wild guess as to how they fixed it.
I frankly don't
Any?
have one. I really don't.
They installed a pirated version of Flash that was still
Oh my
operational in order to
god.
get the city back on the grid.
I really hope they find a more permanent fix than a pirated version of Flash.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh,
Oh.
that's not good. Well, let's see how well that works out. Maybe if we see anything else, and maybe we'll see a railroad, Northern China Railroad runs off of rails. Maybe we'll see something like that. Hopefully not, but we'll see if anything else comes to. Jeez, that's.
yeah, pirated version of Flash that was
I will
still
say that
operational.
surprises me though, because I've been, as you know, I've traveled to and lived in China for a small amount of time as well. I lived in Hangzhou, which is, I think is a tier 2 city. They have tiered cities over there, and I've ridden railroads across a little bit of northern China in between Beijing and Shanghai, and I experienced a lot of different railways, and frankly, it made me jealous why we didn't have railways like that in the US. Like, ours are pretty crappy compared to a lot of other,
But ours don't run on
countries.
Flash Player.
But
So,
then again, yeah, like, that's not something I would expect from the Chinese railway anywhere in China to, like, based on what I experienced. So it's kind of surprising, frankly. I would expect, honestly, not trying to put down US rail systems here, but that's something I would expect from the US rail system, frankly, not the one in China, anywhere, frankly. But we'll see what happens. I hope it's back up and running, and maybe they find a more permanent solution than a pirated version of their previous software, or I mean,
Oh yeah.
yeah, that's interesting. And another thing that I found maybe in some international news over here, actually, I looked into after another viewer submitted thing, I believe, was apparently there's a lot of car manufacturers that come to the U.S. or other various countries, but of course we're here in the U.S., so we're a little biased. We've seen it over history where I can think what Fiat even when they first came over to the U.S. they totally I think it was Fiat if I remember correctly is a good example where they came to the US, they sold a couple cars, and their cars just weren't built for US driving. What's a long haul or a long drive in, Europe or Italy or whatever is nothing near what a long drive is in the US, on open roads going between states. So I think that they failed and then they came back and with modified versions years later. Apparently now along that same line, Vietnam's first automaker is coming to America, which I mean, I'm not putting down Vietnam, but I don't is Vietnam gonna be good at making cars? I don't do they have history of making automobiles at all? I mean,
Well, I mean, every country, not every single country, but lots of larger established countries have their own automakers.
oh, of course. I
Most of the
don't
time they
know.
just don't leave the borders. Like that's why we don't see UAZs over here, or
Yeah.
or some of them get absorbed by larger brands, and we end up with rebranded versions like the
Yeah,
Skoda
yeah.
Octavia is really just a Volkswagen Passat
Might be why
thing.
we never heard of the names, especially if they get acquired by other manufacturers, and before you even can learn one name, it's another one. But I
Right.
mean, apparently, I think this article that a viewer sent in is that like they're bringing. Let me read this here. So it says, well, if it isn't Vietnam coming back all decades after that brief American incursion to the long list of everyday products from the. I mean, granted, we do get a lot of stuff from Vietnam, right? I mean, let's be honest here. Included in that, we in the US currently have in our lives, we may soon be adding two new crossovers from VinFast, Vietnam's first homegrown automaker. So I see a picture of I don't know what the models are or what, but a picture of one, and I got to be honest, it looks like a different to me. It looks like a more muscular, angular, futuristic Ford Explorer. Frankly,
Yeah, it did look extremely interesting
let
when
me
we were
look
looking
up
at the
the article
pictures.
here and make sure that I'm quoting everything correctly here. It was originally, I guess, sent to us from jalopnik.com and written yesterday afternoon by Justin T. Westbrook. And apparently they're going to be electric crossovers as well. So everyone's just coming after Tesla, I guess.
Well, when you make your patents essentially open source, that's kind of what
Yeah,
happens.
I mean that's a good thing, and frankly, yeah, I don't know. I have no thoughts on how they're going to do it, if or good or bad. Frankly, I mean, it looks cool. I looks like it's in my
Well,
opinion,
and I
a
think
more
as long as
futuristic
everything
Explorer.
passes safety standards, I think we're going to see a lot of people trying to break into the market with electric vehicles because they
Yeah.
know, the technology's out there, the technology's improving consistently. It's just a matter of actually
Hmm.
getting it going and getting the sales done in the
Yeah.
states here.
Well, that's something we'll actually touch on a little bit later on, and when we chat about it with vehicle safety and stuff like that too. But I don't know, interesting. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Obviously, ever changing markets, and with automotive markets, and as from what you pointed out to me this week as well, we got more news about Boeing as well, with some changes in the aviation industry
Yeah,
potentially.
and at this point, I think you and I had discussed this before we started recording. I think we're gonna have to start separating out automotive news and uh,
Yeah,
aeronautical
I agree.
news, but we'll come up with some catchier names and transitions for those next week. But um, yeah, kind of switching into the whole aeronautical side of things. So Boeing has committed that by what year was it? It was 2030. So we're talking 9 years from now.
Mm,
They are looking to go entirely biofuel. So cutting down the sustain or the the pollutants by a
Hmm.
significant amount by 2030, and that's essentially using
Yeah.
or looking at potentially using hydrogen or looking at using a biodiesel um, type of
Yeah.
aircraft grade fuel. A lot of
That's
people
a
don't.
big deal too, because I mean,
Yeah.
the amount of freight that goes back and forth, passenger. I mean, granted, during COVID times, maybe not so, but when things get back to or get to the new, as I will keep saying always, the new normal, and or more traditional means of production and business, that's a big deal. The amount of air travel that happens, both
Well, air
commercial
travel
and
with passengers dropped off with COVID, but actual air travel when it comes to
went
logistics
up. Yeah.
skyrocketed last
I
year.
wouldn't, that doesn't, man, that doesn't surprise me. So even maybe that's making up for the passenger sector, and I wouldn't imagine that that's going to stop given changes in business. So when you throw passenger travel back on, well, you know, that's a lot of fuel,
Well,
and a
it,
change like this could be a really big deal, frankly.
it could be a huge green shift in the industry, and with Boeing being essentially the largest manufacturer of commercial airliners to date right
Hmm.
now. I mean that's showing a huge shift in the market. It's going to be
Big
really
commitment
interesting to
too.
see. And yeah,
I think we put that in the same frame of the, that we commit to a certain year, but something to be wary about. We actually talked about last episode is it's one thing to, just say a year to, put a date in the future kind of thing, but the technology also has to be there. And I think though this to being different than like banning internal combustion engines that we talked about last episode, or maybe something else that we actually saw in the recharge over the past week. This technology is already being worked on, and being advanced very heavily. There's already smaller aircraft that operate on a biodiesel kind of fuel. So it's I think it's possible. Frankly, we'll see. But
yeah,
Boeing leading the charge. I mean, that says a lot.
and it's not the first, I guess, movement towards green.
Hmm.
We saw significant steps over the past, I want to say, about 5 years from Airbus and
Hmm.
their essentially E line, where they had an all electric powered one single motor that was all electric powered on one of their Twin Otters, which I believe it was based off a Twin Otter. But that was an interesting move, and I know that there's been a lot of talks about it. It just hasn't necessarily been feasible, and the technology hasn't come to where it is. But again, uh, like we've talked about in the past, sometimes when you put a date on something, it
Hmm.
pushes people to develop, and if that date isn't hit, at least we get real darn
Yeah, we get
close.
other out of it. I think this is actually a little bit different than like say California in the US, versus one state out of 50. I mean, this is Boeing. It's almost like, this isn't just a little manufacturer like one state in the union kind of thing. This is Boeing, who's the largest producer of aircraft in the world currently.
Yeah,
So
there are more
it's a
737s in
huge
the air
step.
than anything else.
So to what we talked about last week, like it's a little bit different scenario where I think about it like where this would be uh this would be like if the US government as a whole kind of said, by X date no more internal combustion engines versus just one state saying it. So we'll see what it's like. I look forward to more green air travel, frankly. And more green everything to that point. So we'll see what happens, right? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
time will tell like anything else. It's not we'll see what happens, but more staying in the air, in the air, or what's not the air. What's what I want to say? Staying in the clouds, up in the air. What a horrible translation, but frankly, you know what I mean.
Yeah, so
Not more air travel news with Prime Air, Amazon doing stuff
yeah,
here.
so Amazon's, I believe it's an Ohio-based airline, but nonetheless, their Prime Air service has bought essentially their first jumbo jets. We're not talking 747s or double deckers, but we are talking about 767s. They are the long range aircraft from Boeing. They
Uh-huh.
are um, they are used, from what we've been able to find out. It was Canadian WestJet and Delta Cargo's 767s that have seen service that are now being bought by Prime Air, being reliveried, and essentially that makes Prime Air an international flight team that has already started seeing some logistical advantages over UPS, which is right now the global leader
Mhm.
in essentially the I'll call them big box cargo brands. Um,
Yeah.
Amazon is obviously huge company. Um,
They do like it seems like literally everything. Like I mean, web services and hosting, and they're obviously Prime and their consumer websites, and like there's everything. Air now, what logistics and deliveries. I mean, yeah, I think you were telling me about like they've taken business away from UPS, and that says a lot
yeah,
already.
and they're
I
slated
mean,
to take a lot more away with the addition of
that's
these
a
long range
huge deal.
aircraft. I
I mean,
mean,
UPS, I remember studying it in college, and UPS used to be just, like package delivery, and they really got on the logistics side of things. I mean, supply chain management and that whole area of expertise. Logistics is a legitimate business. Not that it wasn't before, but even more so in recent years. And they totally revamped, essentially, without going too far into it, because we studied a case study on them. They totally changed how they do business to focus on logistics and that as even a science, kind of. And the fact that Amazon is already essentially taking business from them is just incredible. And yeah, it's
well,
insane.
and for a lot of people who aren't aware, most of the time when you're flying commercially on one of the larger U.S. brands or even some overseas brands, the
Hmm.
non low cost carriers essentially are cargo planes that happen to carry people. United,
Yeah.
Delta, American, um, Air Canada, WestJet, these are all companies in that are operating in North America that are extremely large. Even Lufthansa in Germany. I don't know because I haven't looked into it, but I wouldn't. I also wouldn't put it past Ryanair, although they're a low cost carrier. I wouldn't put it past them. A lot of these carry cargo as well. There's a lot more that goes into these planes than just people.
People in
And
suitcases.
and that's why you got a lot of these COVID videos where someone's traveling from the United States to China or from China to the United States or to Australia, and there's more flight attendants on the flight than there are passengers.
Hmm.
That flight was not meant to be a moneymaker by passenger, it's by cargo.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there there's a wide variety of reasons that planes are up in the air. But a lot of people were like, "Well, what's even the point if you're not even, if you're not filling the plane? What could be, possibly
Yeah.
be the business advantage to
I
that?"
mean, when you buy something on Amazon or not even Amazon, but another site, I mean, how do you think if you're buying something that it gets to you and you can select like, next day, you know? That's not coming, no one's driving through, generally not driving through the night to get you your package. That's going on and you're paying extra to send it on an airplane to get it even quicker. So, I mean,
And in a lot of ways, that's essentially why UPS and FedEx had overnight air or DHL had international
mhm,
air. It was a
yep.
lot faster than putting something on a ship or putting something in a truck. That being said, though, Amazon also, with their whole logistical service, and we could dive deeper into this if we were a logistical podcast, but
Mhm.
essentially, logistically, um, we are more
It's a
or
big
less,
deal.
yeah,
He's a big ship,
it's a big
absolutely.
deal, and if they can justify flying a plane without passengers because the cargo is so lucrative, then
Mhm.
Prime Air is going to have absolutely no problem being Amazon, and now Amazon being a logistics company more so than anything else,
Yeah.
and with the backing and the financials that they do have, it's going to be really interesting now that they can go international with these
Yep.
767s. So
Yeah, that's I don't know. This is a subject that I'm personally interested in, and I, for a while even contemplated studying logistics and supply chain management when I was in school. So it's something that like I don't think that I as an individual, I don't know enough to really, describe what this means, but based on what I remember, this could be and is frankly a big deal. So it's something definitely to watch in the news and with, financial performance and so on and see what happens, frankly, But moving on, something else that you actually brought forward for those who might not know, there's Operation Warp Speed here in the U.S., which is essentially, if from what I understand, is the COVID response. Started under the Trump administration and now being continued or changed under the Biden administration, and that's a big part of that is getting vaccines out to the populace, right? So apparently, the Civil Air Patrol is now joining in to think what deliver vaccines to
Yeah, it's to
further
both
speed up
help
Operation
deliver.
Warp Speed?
Yeah, it's to help deliver and administer vaccines. So essentially, a lot of people or a lot of states, a lot of governors in the United States are calling in the National Guard to help distribute vaccines. It's actually something that the National Guard is
Mhm,
trained for. An extension, not necessarily of the National Guard, but of it's the civilian core of the Air Force is the Civil Air Patrol, and
mhm.
one thing that they
Yep.
are, they are the National Guard of the Air. Essentially, they're not the Air National Guard, but they are. Um,
It's an
the
interesting
it's an
yeah,
interesting piece of all of this. However, that being said, they are also trained to essentially help and assist in the logistics of moving supplies when necessary, as well as search and rescue missions, amongst other things. Um, the Civil Air Patrol is essentially the state run Air Force without jets. Uh, they have agreed to help get involved with, Operation Warp
mhm,
Speed. So, very interesting to see how we
yeah,
are distributing things, and obviously from a news standpoint, seeing the Civil Air Patrol get involved in anything is pretty big.
yeah, I think it's a good step forward. I mean, not any step forward and to accelerate vaccines and fighting COVID in the US or and the world. I mean, I you not like you can't welcome that. So I mean, it's a great thing, and anything that helps further and speed up Operation Warp Speed, frankly, is to again return us everybody, not just here in the U.S. but the entire world. This might be more U.S. specific, of course, but anything that returns us in the world to the new normal is welcomed, more than welcome, frankly. So it's cool to see. See who knows how what else we'll see in the coming months and maybe even I think it'll take a while to vaccinate. The amount of vaccinations that we need in the world, even just this country, is kind of obviously a lot. So it's not like this is going to happen in just 2 months, but over time, interesting to see how we'll continue to take advantage of the resources that everybody has, both in the U.S. and in the world. So to further accelerate the deployment of the vaccines, so to fight COVID, kind of cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something else a couple other things I want to talk about here in recharge that I saw over the past week is something with Ford, but a new more aircraft as well. Is I've always liked like the blimps, and I've always thought they were cool. Like even back in the day, what I think Germany, Nazi Germany had Zeppelin blimps, and at a time, I think blimps were thought of as a future of air travel, frankly. And we saw some interesting things happen with some fires, and maybe
Well, and a lot of that was by using extremely volatile.
yeah. So of course, with anything like technology, maybe had that not happened, technology gets better, and you find out, hey, we used to use lead paint and everything, and now we know that's bad. So we learn right over the course of the years. But something I thought was cool was a Zeppelin shaped business jet that apparently can reach any 2 points in the continental U.S. without stopping, and that's something cool because most business jets are what you when you think of a private jet, like that's what most of them are shaped as. They're very sleek and they look good on the inside and the outside. And this one arguably looks very different, but it affords
Well,
the ability
w-
it affords cool abilities, frankly, over maybe what would be a sleeker business jet.
and one thing that we should point out is that business jets and the quote unquote private or light jets are different.
Mhm,
When we're talking business jet, it's essentially a jet that holds between two to maybe at most eight people,
mhm. Yeah,
um,
generally.
but usually between two and six.
Yeah, I think 6 is really common because if you're buying a business jet, it's generally, I mean, yeah, let me smaller passenger transport, but this company is
But like 14
the
seaters,
company I think is
like the
sorry?
well 14 seaters like the global series from Bombardier are more of that light jet market. So
Yeah.
and that's getting into kind of like the mid jets, not commercial, but kind of in that. So we're talking about a small jet. In fact, it's called for those who want to look it up, it is called the Otto Solera 500L, and I'll let you kind of go deeper into it because you're the one who brought this up.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, it's the Solera 500L from Auto Aviation, and it looks like kinda like a cigar, frankly. It looks like a cigar where it's a little fatter in the middle and tapers at the ends. It also has a propeller on the back as well, and it's essentially the fuselage and its very large wings are designed for greater air efficiency and flying through the air, and I think it's kinda cool. And the other interesting thing is because of the shape of the fuselage, the designers were able to actually fit, it would not only reduces drag by like 60% from a typical fuselage, but they were also able to fit 6 seats inside with headroom going like from like 6 foot 2 inches, which is, I mean, I could stand up in that aircraft and not have a problem. And that's also really cool. I don't know, the kind of sales volume for the aircraft, but it's something unique. And I also think it runs on bio. Looking at the article here from Rob Report, written by Michael Verdon, I think it runs on biodiesel as well, or a biofuel of sorts. And the cool thing is, it only has a $328 per hour operating cost. So if you're in
Yeah,
the market
that's
for a
extremely
business
low
jet,
for a jet.
that I can get you and 6 people with spacious headroom, and for a very low operating cost, you might want to look, and it's a little bit different shaped, but a little bit cheaper. You might want to look at the Auto Aviation Solera 500L, which I think is pretty cool. Something unique. I always like unique things, and looking inside looks like you what it looks like on the outside looks just like what you would expect on the inside. Frankly, nothing out of the ordinary. So cool.
Very
I
cool.
like seeing a lot of like a lot of trends in aviation. I know we talked about, if you like, there's a lot of really cool planes and people. There's even companies I think trying to bring back supersonic flight, and they're testing different airframes and shapes, and it's always cool to see innovation, frankly, because let's face it, planes generally look the same, give or take, to the untrained eye year after year after year. So anything cool and new, I think, is a really gets some more blood flowing for people, gets them interested in aviation. So
Yeah,
I
I
think
I
I don't know
absolutely
what
agree.
else we got. I think we have one more thing that real quick here, and apparently Ford is last thing I read over the week was Ford is bringing they filed for to patent with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Essentially, they filed for a patent for the name of Thunderbird again. So they're apparently Ford's bringing back the Thunderbird name potentially. We don't know in what. I think speculation right now says potentially for concept cars and things like that. But I mean, it's a distinctive name, obviously back in the day, and I don't know what they're gonna do with it. But early reports seem that they're gonna bring that name back some way in some shape or form. So maybe they'll turn that into another electric crossover.
I really hope not.
They're just gonna make everything an electric crossover and just change everything. But hey, we'll see what happens. Yeah,
Yeah,
That's all I've got for
absolutely.
what I've seen the past couple weeks here, past week.
Yeah. So I think with that, now normally we would go into Hamilton watch, or Sir Hamilton watch. Because there hasn't been a ton of Hamilton news, Matt and I
And
have
we
come.
really don't know what's going to happen with him, given that there's still negotiations going. We don't really know what's going to his future in F1. So,
Yeah, so we've decided to rename the section F1 News and Updates.
and to
Oh man,
start
that
that
feels good.
off, the only thing I could find for would have been Sir Hamilton watches contract negotiations still seem to be going on for him securing a seat in the next season. But based on what I'm reading, obviously, we haven't heard anything yet, so there hasn't been a decision made, and it sounds like Hamilton was with his lofty contract demands and was kind of expecting, and I think rightly so, just to kind of get whatever he wants, frankly, and demand whatever he wants and still get a seat. It sounds like when George Russell took a drive in the same car, Hamilton didn't expect that, frankly, and that's making some of his contract negotiations more difficult. Where he had an iron grip on what would have been the seat, but he didn't expect, somebody else to perform so well in his car. And frankly, I would argue too, if at the beginning of the season, if I was Hamilton, I would have expected to, you know, for whatever the season, looked like, I'm going to drive well, best car, we're going to win again, I'm going to win again, and demand whatever. But then he got COVID, and someone else drove for Mercedes and did really well, and that kind of puts a little bit of a damper on your contract negotiation abilities. So, sounds like that might be a reason why he might not just be getting what he wants, frankly, and it's making negotiations more for him more difficult. And we'll see what happens. I don't know. I think we've seen Mercedes leak some stuff with their social media, and they, like some teasers, but to be honest, I don't know which way it's going. So frankly, it still sounds like difficult negotiations, and who knows if Hamilton will be in F1 in the next season or not. We'll have to wait and see. I don't know unless you have seen anything else, Nick.
No, I really haven't. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head as far as everything that we've seen this week, just as
Yeah.
far as Hamilton is concerned, specifically.
Yeah, moving on in you wanna this is something you told me about. I am
Yeah.
not in
So
something else for F1 updates.
yeah.
Potential.
So for those of you who have been longtime listeners or listeners from the beginning of the podcast, first of all, thank you. Second of all, you'll notice that even though it didn't really happen this year, in the past we've done a lot of chats about Formula E and Formula One. Uh, it has been brought to the table by the former CEO of F1 that Formula E and Formula One should look at a merger. And the idea behind it
That
is the
would be
battery.
interesting.
Yeah, extremely interesting. With the idea behind it being that the technology from Formula E, which kind of, it can develop year to year, but is slowly falling off and doesn't have the fan base that F1 does, has the technology to essentially make Formula One a greener organization as a whole, while also bringing in a lot more viewership on the green side of racing, while still using and looking at the biofuel options that have been discussed in Formula One over time to start getting them towards carbon neutral. So that would be hydrogen, a biodiesel type engine, a lot of the uh, alternative energy or the alternative fuels being used in conjunction with the Formula E battery technology that's available.
Yeah.
So,
It's interesting. I mean, I know we were talking about it if you ever saw like an F1 car, for example, with if Formula E hybrid technology, battery technology. What if they went like a hydrogen powered car for something that in and of itself, is presents its own challenges with how hydrogen engines run, and water being the byproduct and not having. Then we were talking about ways you can get around stuff like that with evaporators and condensers and so on, but I don't really know if I am in favor of it or not from a technological standpoint. I am, and bringing that battery technology to make the hybrid technology of F1 even better. But at the same right, there are parts of Formula E with the fan interaction and, fan boosts and stuff like that that I think is the future of racing. And I don't know if stuff like that would be brought over to, in a merger. So
That
there
yeah,
are
that
ways
would
that I'm for
be
it and ways that I'm against it, I guess, in terms of if you look at Formula One for innovation and technology, absolutely for it. But I would hope that, F1 and through the merger, if there ever was one, I think there are other lessons to be learned from, Formula E and things they've discovered. So to make the sport ever, more, uh, what's the word, interesting or drawing for new viewers and younger fans and so on. So
well,
I don't
and,
really know.
and look at
I
the
see it.
sponsorships that you can get with something like Formula E that you can't
Mhm.
get with Formula One because it's gas powered.
Yeah.
You can get a lot more deals on a green side. Plus, anything that gets Porsche back into Formula One or into Formula One again in general is always a plus for me. So,
Yeah. We'll see. Maybe another thing in F1 that I've seen over the past week is Red Bull has reached an engine deal with Honda F1. So for through the 20, I think through to the end of 2022 season, Red Bull and AlphaTauri are able to use Honda F1 engines. I don't think they'll get factory support. I think is the deal. That was the thing with Honda pulling out after the 2021 season as an engine manufacturer. They wouldn't get factory support. I'm not sure how that deal works, but it looks like they've gotten permission from Honda to essentially use the same engines through this season and Honda Power through 2022. As we all may remember, there's Red Bull trying to negotiate with the FIA for engine freezes so they can basically figure out what to do. And it sounds like all that's left to do, and they're expecting an announcement even in the coming days potentially, that they just need written, proof from the FIA saying that there will be an engine freeze for manufacturers in F1 in general. So this is more so on the between not between Red Bull and the FIA and other teams. This is more so between Red Bull and Honda specifically. So sounds like based on what Red Bull has been going for, the last thing that they need is just written, consent from the FIA for their engine freeze for other teams and manufacturers as well. So, I mean, that's good for them. They obviously have a bunch to figure out. So they'll be using what looks like Honda Power through 2022 until they figure something else out. So, assuming, again, the FIA and the other engine manufacturers say, hey, yes, we'll agree to the freeze. So, sounds like they're going to get it, frankly, based
yeah,
on what I'm reading.
from
Sounds like
everything I've
now
seen,
teams are.
yeah.
Yeah, I think previously we talked about it before, where other manufacturers weren't on board with an engine freeze, and pardon me, everyone's been saying now that yes, they are. Essentially, I don't anticipate FIA and other manufacturers now saying no. So it might not be big news, but it's arguably one of the it's the most important part. Like it's the power unit and all, with the new, you know, in the coming years of the F and Formula One technology and budget caps and different emissions requirements. Like it's a big deal. So in terms of really nitty gritty F1 stuff. So we'll see. Yeah, I think I read in the article that was from I thought from F1 Online. Let me see who was writing it, but I'll get that information if you want to cover the last thing that we heard one here real quick.
Yeah, so obviously Daniel Ricciardo has moved to McLaren this year.
Hmm.
Um, and everybody's in the process of testing their new cars, starting to show the quote unquote leaked photos or just preview shots of their cars. Um, Daniel obviously driving the MCL 35M this year. There was a sticker that was posted to McLaren's social
I think it was
media
their
accounts
Instagram and other accounts, right?
showing the nameplate, showing the certification for the 2021 race year. But next to it was a QR code. And for those of you who don't know what a QR code is, it's a little square code that you can scan with a cell phone or tablet, and it'll take you essentially to either a web page or to a store page where you can download an app or anything like that. Or you can essentially store technology on a server somewhere that
Mhm.
that QR code can pull from. Well, this
Yeah.
one was a link, and it was a link to the Men at Work song Down Under, being that Daniel's from Australia. Just a fun little nod. Someone thought, hey, let's check out this QR code and see what it is. And it essentially was like the Australian version of Rick rolling the McLaren audience, which is generally makes us happy, and that's why we enjoy being F1
Yeah.
fans, is the little things like that.
It's like, they take part in fun. They're not all serious, and it was a cool. I mean, I'm happy. I think we're gonna see some great things out of Ricciardo at McLaren and an interesting season. So they're having fun, in the off season basically. So it was cool to see. As a final maybe touch up here for F1 news this week. I did find it was the article we're talking about for the engine stuff for Red Bull and their engine deals was from written by Global Motorsports Media on and actually published 2 days ago on the 22nd on Auto Week. So it sounds like I just confirmed that Red Bull will be moving forward with Honda F1 power through the 2022 season without factory support. So frankly, I don't know how that's going to work if something goes wrong, but I would expect that given last season Honda was the only manufacturer who didn't have engine penalties and seemed to for the most part, function pretty well. I would hope that Red Bull doesn't need factory support for their power units in the next couple seasons. But yeah, you never know. Something breaks. I don't know
Right.
who's going to fix it, but they must have ways to fix it in case something goes wrong if they're moving forward without factory support. So after 2022, who knows what's going to happen? I don't know, frankly, but we'll have to see. So I think that caps off our F1 news that I've seen over the past week.
Yep, I would say that caps off the F1 news and updates. So why don't we go ahead and move on into paddock chat?
Start chatting a little bit more deeply here, right? A little more
Yeah.
in depth. So you want to talk about F-150 Ford F-150 popularities and trucks and kind of evolving auto market
Yeah, so
trends.
so the North American market has seen some pretty significant shifts even in the past. I would say it started probably around 2011 and is really starting to hit its peak now. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the American market buying large mid-sized to large crossovers, SUVs and pickup trucks.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people overseas don't understand why we like pickup trucks so much, but our infrastructure is kind of designed around it,
Yeah.
especially at this point with semi trucks, or as the people overseas call them, lorries. Um, you know, we've kind of developed the personal vehicle to be larger. I mean, my
Mm-hmm.
my Durango is
It's huge.
extraordinarily larger than the original Durango that came out in the
I actually
90s.
have some thoughts on as to why that is, but I think what we've seen the Ford F-150 is the number one selling car in America, I believe, for I
Yeah,
don't know
it's
how
it's
many
the number
years.
one selling vehicle
Like
in America.
vehicle is the right term, but it's also the number one selling truck for I think I was saying like what four was it 40 something years now
Uh,
in a row?
yeah, it everything that I've read has always said just over 4 decades. I don't know if we've actually been keeping track that long, but
Yeah,
essentially,
like cited it, but I mean it makes sense that that it is because I think now I was reading this afternoon about how the Ram Dodge Ram came in second, and usually in the U.S. it's a competition between I think ever since 1997 when I think that's when the Ram was first introduced to the U.S. market. Ever since then, it's basically been a three-way competition between Dodge's quote unquote the Dodge offering because it was the Dodge Ram, and now it's just the Ram pickup truck, frankly.
yeah, that
And then the Chevy
brand split off
Silverado,
when
yeah, a little bit, and then you have the Ford F-150, and I think the F-150 has still remained supreme. But then
well,
again,
I remember in shop class in high school, we talked about that. I mean, you could line every Ford F-150 mirror to mirror, not front to back, but mirror to
mhm,
mirror, side by side, and go around the world 3 or 4 times.
yeah,
And that
like
was
how many
back
of
in
us sold?
2012, 2013.
I mean, we Americans like our pickup trucks, and I think it's still this year, even in 2020, I would besides the GMC Sierra, the Ram actually declined in sales growth. Like, granted, it's 2020, right? When the issues abound with the automotive market economy. So,
Everybody declined about 18%. The industry declined
except
about 18%, except for the F-150.
I was reading. I don't remember what I was, but one of them I was reading was saying something like the while the Ram is in second, it's still like 100,000 units behind, which is a huge
Well, it
margin,
was actually
frankly.
the Silverado last year.
Was it? Because the
The
one I was
Sil-
reading was
the
one I was
Silverado
reading was from October of what was like from October. That's
and
not too
the
long
two
ago.
reports that I read, one was from U.S. News and World Report, and the other one was from I believe Edmunds. Both of them had the Silverado selling out better than the
Really?
Dodge by the end of the year. So these were published, I believe, in the last week.
Okay.
So
I mean, that's a little bit newer than mine, maybe, but nonetheless, it still sounds like the one I was reading, at least at the time, was I maybe even projecting, but I think is it now every because what they were saying was that both the Ford and the GMC Sierra were actually the only two uh, truck models to increase sales in 2020, where everybody else declined essentially. I don't know if it does. I can't say if the Sierra is in fact keeps that title, but what we know for sure is the F-150 is maybe one of the only, or potentially the only, pickup truck to have increased in sales in 2020 based
yeah,
on projections.
well, and it should be noted that we're talking about not necessarily just the F-150. It's the Ford F Series in general. So that also includes the 250
Yeah,
and
I guess I'm
350.
so
But
used
the
to. Yeah, I guess that's my bad there. When I say F-150, my brain knows like the Ford F Series pickup trucks, but yeah, not specifically the 150 variant, but yeah, the whole line.
the 150 is obviously the most popular out of those.
Yeah.
But in total or in general, the F-150, the F Series pickup trucks from Ford were completely blowing everything else. And that
Yeah,
we're not just
they're
talking
still
pickup
king.
truck. We're talking, it is, I mean, first place was the F-150, second place was the Silverado, third place was the Ram, but then fourth place, just to put it in perspective, was, I believe, the Toyota RAV4. So we're
Mhm.
not talking just just trucks or pickup trucks in general. We're
It
talking
it's
about
a whole
all
shift in
cars
the
across
market,
the,
right?
yeah.
I mean, it's the F-150 still remains supreme, and I think it frankly, no matter how good, I think Motor Trend and Car and Driver have named like the Ram pickup truck, like the truck of the year for the past year or two potentially. I mean, the Ram makes a good truck. Chevy makes a good truck as well. At the same time, like there's still, the king position belongs to the Ford F-150, right? And in terms of like market trends, here in the US, we have, I think we've talked about this a little bit with Zach as well, but I mean, we have wider road. Like our trucks are huge, even compared to the trucks sold in other countries and in other markets and around the world. And we have huge roadways, huge parking lots. Like you said earlier to this on this episode, in the chat here, where we're kind of built for it anyway. But in my opinion, I think the reason why crossovers and SUVs, I'm going to lump SUVs in with pickup trucks, and I'm going to talk about crossovers a little bit separately. And you see the decline of the car and the sedan because I think at least when you move from a sedan or a four-door or two-door, car up to a crossover, I think you don't really lose anything, frankly. It's still, you still have a lot more room. Those cars are still great, most of them, right? Like we saw the said Toyota RAV4 is number 4 or number 3, what was it you said?
Number four. So it went, yeah, it was
So
the
a
three
good
large
crossover.
truck brands,
Very
and they're,
popular, right? But when
yeah.
you move up to like something like a RAV4 or a smaller large crossover, you still have a light car, you still have great fuel efficiency, you have a lot of extras, and you get the same stuff you get in a sedan, except you also have the extended cargo room plus a little bit higher off the ground, so better visibility and ground clearance, So when you move from, in my opinion, from a sedan, I'm not saying that I prefer crossovers to sedans, or in some ways I don't, ways I do, but I think when you move up to a crossover, you don't really lose anything. You only really kind of get gains. And one could argue that when you move from like a sedan to an SUV or a pickup truck, for example, you know, generally the rule of thumb for a truck or an SUV is they're gas guzzlers, right? They don't have great fuel efficiency, and but in fact they're not only like they're bigger, they're heavier, they don't handle as well compared to like a small sedan, and their fuel economy is getting much better even with pickup trucks like recent F-150s and F models and so on. But at the same time, I think people are willing to accept that for what it provides them, even more greater ground clearance. And frankly, with here in the US, a pickup truck or an SUV allows you more ability. So things you like to do outside of work or things you picture yourself doing, like going off road or doing these fun activities, the trucks and SUVs allow you to do that or even potentially live that out, even if you don't, right?
Right.
And
So,
another frame. Oh, sorry. You want to?
well, just on that point too. Um, we've kind of got the culture of the wide open states essentially.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
when you take something into effect like the truck market as it sits now and the size of trucks,
Mhm.
versus how they were a couple of years ago, and then you take a look at kind of the culture that the states have right now, where um, it is kind of a bigger is better, and you can get more
Yeah.
done with something bigger. It
Mhm.
makes sense. I mean, you can look at it in all kinds of different mediums. Take, for example, everybody across the world has seen American cop shows where back in even the early 2000s, everything was the Ford Crown Victoria. Everything was that was synonymous with police officers was the Ford Crown Victoria, and fire chiefs were using them, and public works were using them
Mhm.
for the smaller projects and things. And now, what's the synonymous vehicle with police? It's a Tahoe, or which is essentially a Silverado chassis,
Mhm. Ford
or
Explorer.
the Ford Explorer is the number one seller right now, and probably will continue to be that way. That's a full size SUV. I wouldn't maybe not full size, but that's a larger
Yeah.
SUV. You know, on the Dodge side, the Durango, um, with the Charger really only being the last police sedan available right now.
Mhm. Yeah. I think another reason that I was thinking about is, given the economic time that we're in right now, everyone's kind of stretching and difficult and going through difficult times. I think another reason why you see like especially pickup trucks and SUVs, but mainly like even just pickup trucks, is they are bigger and lighter. They're bigger. That they use more gas in a sedan or even a crossover, and they don't handle as well. But here's the thing: they're getting better, and they are a lot better from what they were 10 years ago. Pickup trucks chiefly have much better interiors and technology. Just look at the new Ram. I mean, when you and I both
Well,
sat the first time, we
eh,
were kind of amazed, right? At
right, and the new Ram. I mean, they're becoming
they're becoming
they're
as luxurious as other cars are. Like, I'm not saying like Rolls Royce quality, but they're becoming so much better than what you think a quote pickup truck is. Even the mid trim models versus the higher ones.
the base model of, and I'm not talking like the tradesmen. So for those of you who don't know, like the tradesmen are the really stripped down ones, where
Mhm.
it's cloth seats, essentially a metal
You
floor with a little bit of
definitely
carpeting
use
over it.
on job sites, and you don't really like,
They're
they're built to be abused
yeah, they're more or less
and used.
disposable trucks.
Yeah.
Um, the outside of that, when you get into the true consumer models, so
Mhm.
not the tradesmen, but the base models nowadays. I mean, we're seeing what you would have gotten quality wise from a Lincoln out of a base model F one
Yeah.
fifty. Now, what you would have gotten out of a Lincoln 10 years ago.
Yeah, and, like,
So,
along the same lines of, all trucks are gas guzzlers, well, as trucks get lighter, like, I think the F-150 is all aluminum, and
well,
as they
and
get
and
lighter.
the number one selling engine variant in the F 150 this year was the EcoBoost.
Yeah,
It's a
because you get
V6.
the yeah, so I think it's interesting that they have gotten much more, and I think will continue to get much more fuel efficient, so you're winning there. It's the luxury aspect of things, you can still get a lot more. And I remember growing up and my parents had a 2003 Ford Explorer, and that, quote, unquote, the drives like a truck, and even so, trucks are getting even better in terms of handling, and with despite how high off the ground they are, how high their center of gravity is, the handling is getting much better as well. And here's the other thing: in the U.S., especially nowadays, maybe this is one reason why we've seen the explosion, not explosion, but maybe the F series of pickup trucks from Ford outsell and even everybody else during 2020. Not everyone the world over, but especially here in the US, not everyone can afford to have, even 2 cars, let alone 3, 4, 5, whatever. So if you can only afford 1 car, you can get a whole lot of what you get out of a sedan or a crossover out of a pickup truck. Plus, you have the size, the ability to transport whatever you need, and it can do all of these different things. You can take it off-road if you really want to, or imagine yourself doing it. It can
Well,
haul whatever you need. It can do everything if you can only afford 1 car as well, 1
and
automobile.
for the American market, that's a lot more reasonable than trying to justify a truck
Mhm.
for, let's say, the UK market, where everything is more designed to be public
Yeah,
transportation, more designed to be
yeah,
smaller, fuel efficient, diesels, things like that,
mhm.
manual transmissions, when essentially the American market is the it it's the wider shared road perspective where
Yeah.
everybody is
They just
on
work.
the
I
same
mean,
page. Yeah.
they work well, whether it's, from any angle you look at trucks and SUVs, but even so pickup trucks, I mean, they're getting better. They have gotten better. Where they used to be bad, they're not so much anymore. They were designed for it. I mean, they can fill so many roles, whether they're, if you're, it
Well,
makes
and
sense,
we've
frankly.
seen other non-US brands breaking into that market. Look at the Toyota Tundra.
Yeah, because
The
they capitalize on what we're built for, right?
Yeah,
And
and the
smart.
well, and then you've got brands like the Nissan Titan, which is
Mhm.
made here in the states.
Yep. Yeah,
So
I
it
don't think that I don't think the shift will go away anytime soon. I think it'll only get even more, and so someday you'll see, maybe sedans and smaller cars will come back, but there will be a time where you see, like, not that you don't already, but the road just flooded with even more SUVs and trucks than you do now over here in the States, at least.
yeah, I think so.
Moving along the line, something else I wanna talk about, maybe do a little bit of a PSA here. I was reading that, a while ago, but we've talked about Tesla and, safety issues and recalls and quality issues and whatnot, and apparently I was reading an article from a publication called Electrek, like electric trekking. I don't know. Hard to pronounce. It was written by a guy named Fred Lambert. And apparently, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, the NHTSA, we Americans love our acronyms, right?
Or NHTSA
Your
for short.
NHTSA, yeah. So for sure, they've asked Tesla to recall the Model S and Model X over, I think their screen. Another thing with Tesla recalls, right? With, I think, over screens and essentially electronic issues that can, maybe cause a lot bigger issues. And the point is, like Teslas have huge touch screens, and that's a safety issue in and of itself potentially. You see the Mercedes gigantic hyperscreen, and one could argue the bigger screens get, not only do they have to function properly, because could you imagine if you're rolling down the road and so you're touching your big giant center touch screen and it doesn't work, so you keep tapping it, keep playing with, all of a sudden crash. I think that's a big issue, and that's maybe a separate topic. We talk about distractions with how big screens have gotten and whatever. But in terms of recalls, I think we want to point out, both of us, that crash tests and safety ratings are important when buying a new car. I think, for the first time I've ever seen, I was interested in it, that cars actually get 0 star crash test ratings, which are horrible. Like, 1 and 2 stars are horrible. You should not buy them. But imagine how bad an automobile needs to be to get a 0 star rating. They essentially fail at every turn, a crash test. And I
And
don't think that's a lot of things that people look at. And I know that when I was helping my parents get a new car, I looked at that as well, because you don't really think about that. You assume cars are safe, and of course they have airbags and they're in seat belts and they're fine. But when you purchase or lease a new car, or anything really, but especially an automobile, you need to pay attention to those things as well. By and large, I think there are markets, and I don't know which ones that are less safety restrictions than like say the US market does. I'm not saying here in the US, but these kinds of cars, especially for international viewers, you need to be careful if you don't have as stringent safety rules and crash test ratings. When you buy a new car, you need to make sure that it's safe for your family. I think there was a Suzuki model that I saw that got a 0-star crash test rating. I'm trying to find the name of the car. You said you found one as well, Nick, right?
Yeah,
That had
and
got 0
that
stars.
was even that car was designed. The one that I saw was for the Latin American market,
Hmm.
and in the Latin American market, the side curtain airbags and the rear safety airbags for children in the back seat are not requirements like they are here in the states.
Hmm.
So, which again is also on like the Euro NCAP safety standards, American NHTSA safety standards. Is there's a certain number of airbags and a certain location of those airbags that is considered compliant. A
Hmm.
lot of the ones that got 0 stars were cars that were designed for other markets that were potentially being sold in the US or Euro market. Um,
The one that I'm thinking of, I think, was designed for the American markets. It was Suzuki, the Maruti Suzuki Espresso, and I think it didn't pass because it didn't have properly designed crumple zones. And what that essentially is like there's things like a trunk, right? It's designed to collapse and absorb impacts. And there's besides seat belts and airbags, there are parts of cars that are designed to absorb impacts to could protect the occupants inside in case of an accident.
there are
And this
parts of
car
cars
did
that
not
are
do that.
is essentially designed to crumble in an
Yep.
accident, hence crumple zone. But there are
This
also
car didn't even those didn't even work properly. And see, it just got. I've never seen a 0-star rating, frankly. And that, like, obviously, even though that this automobile is designed for the South American and Indian markets where they might not have as strict safety requirements, it's still something that people, even in something like the UK or the US, where we have better safety standards, one could argue, you still have to look at it. Like if I was gonna go buy a new car, no matter how bad I wanted it, if it had a 3-star, I probably wouldn't even consider it, let alone a 4-star. I'd be focusing on 4 and 5 stars because eventually you're gonna put yourself or potentially your family in that automobile. Why would you not wanna know how safe it is potentially or not, frankly? I don't think it's something people think about, you know?
no, it is. I know when you have a family, you're looking at something like a minivan. It's a lot more so. But when you're
Mhm.
looking at a car for just yourself, one car that had horrible crash safety ratings, which has gotten significantly better in the very recent years, was the Jeep Wrangler.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The Wrangler had horrible safety ratings, but it was one of the number one selling vehicles. I was in the top 25 for a long time.
Mhm.
Um,
Well,
and
just goes to show that I think that just goes to show that, a lot of people when purchasing, like, yeah, it could be a fun, really cool car, but I mean, I would like to ask those people who made it fall on 25 number on the list, did they when they bought the car, did they actually look at what the safety ratings were?
yeah,
And if
and
they
when you
knew, would they have bought it again, frankly?
right,
Before it got better, right? Before it is better now, that is true. They made huge improvements in its design and, to make it more safe for occupants, but again, like, you know, I just find it interesting that that's something that I personally look at when I was helping my parents, didn't even focus on it either. When I was helping them pick out a new car that they got, towards the end of last year, I brought it up that, "Hey, you guys are looking at, features and, safety features, like, what? Parking sensors and things like that, but what about did you look at their crash test ratings and that part of the safety?" And, of course, they hadn't. So, I mean, and I
and
helped them.
we've seen really good ratings out of Subaru, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean they boast the absolute crap out of it in their commercials,
And you
as they
should, and you
should. Yeah.
have.
So
If you can
here,
achieve those levels, I think absolutely on them. Like, if they can achieve level if how awesome would it be, it might not be the best marketing angle, but if every single model that you offer had a 5-star crash test rating or a 5 and 4-star. I mean, I think Subaru might fall into that category,
Well,
frankly.
and I
And
think a lot of people assume that their
mhm,
car has a good crash test rating, or else why would they
yeah,
sell it, right? But
hmm
looking at the current, even the 2020 Jeep Wrangler and the 2021,
hmm
as far as crash worthiness goes, the it it typically goes good, acceptable, marginal, and then poor,
hmm
with a superior, advanced, or basic setting for the options.
hmm
The crash worthiness on the small overlap, so not even the moderate overlap or the full overlap, but the small overlap of the front driver's side of the 2020 Jeep Wrangler was marginal.
I mean, yeah, and that's better from what it was, but it's still something that, I mean, it could very well be safe enough, and you could say, "Hey, I'm that's never going to happen to me," and it might very well. But I guess as a PSA, I want to make sure people when they're buying whatever car they're buying, even if it's a Rolls Royce or an espresso um, Suzuki or whatever that car was, frankly, that I had never heard of before today. You need to pay it as much as you pay attention to the other stuff you
Well,
want.
I mean,
You have to think of I will.
even just looking at the headlights right now, for the 2020 Wrangler, the headlights got a poor rating because even though they are LED projectors, it
Mhm.
said that the low beams created a significant glare that they needed to mark down on the windshield.
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's if we can say anything from chatting about this when you're buying a new car, just make sure you do as you already should, do your research, even beyond just, your traditional leather seats and your rear backup camera. There's a lot more that goes into safety of your vehicle besides just the sensors that you're getting nowadays. And I think cars largely have tons of more sensors, and obviously they have a lot more systems to help keep us safe and greater airbag protection and lots of design increases and things like that. But crash tests are still important, and I think it's probably there's a reason why it's a big deal. There's a reason why
and
it does stuff like that.
just because a car is for sale doesn't mean that it has great crash test ratings.
All it means that it passed the minimum requirements to be able to be sold. Frankly, and one could argue,
Exactly.
no matter how good a car company is, they're in the business of selling cars. Yes, they don't want to hurt their customers, but at the same time, it's why they might push some cars off and that's why you have giant recalls because they just what's the saying with the military, like your aircraft is built from you know with a bunch of parts all from the lowest bidder or something, how that goes. Like, you got to remember, at the
Yeah,
same time, people are out to manufacturers are out to sell a whole lot and minimize their costs. And as great as things might be nowadays, sometimes that's at the expense of safety, frankly. So you just need to be careful, frankly.
yeah, just yeah, exactly. Just make sure that you understand what you're truly getting into when you buy a vehicle.
Yeah, I think the last thing I want to chat about here is stuff with the auto show. So I found an interesting. I was doing some like rabbit hole night searching on stuff, and it got me thinking. Remember when was it Dodge and when they unveiled the Challenger Demon, and they basically launched it inside of a building. You know,
Yeah,
remember that?
they launched it from inside of a crate across a stage in a full
Which
blown drag race.
is incredible, and it seems like Chrysler now, obviously having been renamed, but Chrysler has had an act in the past of doing things like this. With when the 1997 Dodge Ram was unveiled, going back to our pickup truck talk, right? Apparently, they had a silhouette of a pickup truck under a black cloth, essentially, and instead of just revealing that and pulling the curtain back, they dropped the truck from the ceiling and flattened that, whatever that was, presumably like a cardboard something. And even before that, when the Cherokee, I think in '93, the Jeep Grand Cherokee got was unveiled, the president of Chrysler and the mayor of Detroit, I think at the time, essentially drove the Cherokee into the convention center for the Detroit Auto Show through a glass window.
Yeah, they
Just
climbed the steps of the Detroit Convention Center and drove through a plate glass window and then drove it onto the floor.
uh-huh, and that's kind of cool. I mean, you saw maybe, like, small things like that, like with the Elon Musk and the Cybertruck release, they were trying to, like, smash it's unfortunately successfully smash the windows of the Cybertruck. I mean, it seems like Chrysler's had an act for doing stuff like this, taking risks with their marketing and new car reveals, and I wish new other manufacturers would take more risks like that, frankly, because it's really cool. It makes the headlines, obviously,
Well,
and I'd like to think that
it
that's
does, but I think that one of the best marketing tools that they've had is, and the reason we're saying the auto show specifically
mhm,
is some of the stuff. It's been a habit, not a habit. It's been a tradition of ours to go to the Chicago Auto Show
yep.
every. And this year, obviously, it's been
Always saw
postponed.
at
But
the Jeep was it Camp Jeep or something like that? And I think that, you
well, they've
know,
got Camp Jeep, they've got the Ram work area, but then in the past, we've
but other
done,
manufacturers do it too.
yeah, our theme from, was it last year or 2 years ago, was that we discovered the Land Rover Discovery.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I was kind of upset that they weren't there at the last show we went to, but I think, we see these it might be a little unrelated, but at the same time, like, I think you were saying at SEMA, they were, they were jumping, yeah, Kia Tellurides,
Yeah, amongst other things. Yeah, but
they were
they were
legitimately
jumping.
jumping them. But
Yeah.
these giant marketing stunts, maybe, kinda speared with car show, car reveals by, what Chrysler used to do. Other manufacturers would attempt them and not really kinda be as successful as them because they were Chrysler was a little quirky, back in the day anyway. I mean, look at the Prowler that they created, and that's a little interesting anyway.
Yeah,
But
that was a Plymouth.
I mean, at the same time, I mean, it's the auto show, and I think to that point, auto manufacturers have been in even more recent years taking, risks in their marketing and doing things like Camp Jeep and towing demonstrations and stuff at auto shows where it's interesting. No one wants to see, I think a boring car reveal, or they don't, no one wants to go to a car show just to look at models on the floor anymore. And in large part, what Camp Jeep and all the rides fill up. Why we go there to Camp Jeep because that's the number one usually
Well, and
among the
it's
other
usually
ones.
the one that's always busy because you get to ride in the new Jeeps and you get to go through the course. I mean, it's like going off roading
Yeah, I like to
indoors.
think that the Chrysler of old and these awesome, just cool marketing stunts essentially kind of paved the way for the stuff that we see now. And I hope that auto manufacturers take even more risks, frankly. And to your point, they're doing what they intended to do anyway. When we went on the Land Rover ride along, I had never given the Discovery a second thought until we took a ride in one, and like you said, we
Well, and we
discovered
were sitting
how
there
great it
like
was.
we were sitting there essentially begging to go on uh the ride with
Range.
the Range Rover.
Yeah.
And when we got the Discovery, at first we were disappointed, and then we saw the capabilities of the Discovery, and we walked out of that show saying that our number one thing was we discovered the Land Rover Discovery and its capabilities, and it was extremely well done.
Mhm. It just goes to show that when you take I mean, granted, maybe now things like Camp Jeep and the ride-alongs and stuff like that is kind of commonplace, but before, years ago, it wasn't. I mean, just like even more years ago, frankly, the Jeep Grand Cherokee was debuted 2 years before I think we were even and, they when you take risks like that, you can maybe set trends, and I'm not gonna say that that led to the current form of the auto show, but I like to see auto manufacturers take risks because if you do it right, it pays off. I mean, point in case. I mean, I haven't bought a Discovery, but put it this way, if I ever needed one, I would have no reservations about buying a Discovery, frankly, at all. Or
Right.
for I think we had a similar, impressions on, well, frankly, the Ram. Like I had never, my grandparents have always driven Dodge trucks, and I really never, cared for them over, say, like if I wanted to truck an F-150 until you and I sat in. Granted, a higher trim model of the Ram, of course, for marketing purposes at I think maybe the year after the Discovery ride,
Yeah,
and
it
we
was
saw its
last year because it was right
capability.
before the pandemic. But
Yeah, we saw its capability, but also the interior and just I mean, the giant screen, the center console on the screen, kind of like a Tesla, and it was. I was kind of shocked, frankly, just to go ahead and show the increase in capability and luxury of pickup trucks. But it's when you take risks, especially nowadays, it can bring you big rewards. But now the interesting thing with auto shows specifically, I don't know if we'll see how those evolve, right? Because I think manufacturers like are pulling out of auto shows. Even I think didn't BMW not too long ago, Ford pull out of the Geneva Motor Show before the pandemic. I mean,
Yeah,
you
and
know,
a lot of people were saying, "Oh, the auto show is great for, you know, essentially brand recognition,
hmm
but people are going to buy what they're going to buy." And I think that's the wrong attitude to go about it.
yeah,
I think yes, I go and I look at the brands that I like at the auto
hmm
show.
I would agree.
I still think I mean, we discover a new car that we never would have thought we would have liked every year,
Oh yeah, I mean,
every time we
and
go.
yeah, I think what was the last one was the Hyundai Sonata. Hyundai, am I pronouncing it correct? I want to pronounce it correctly.
Well,
Hyundai,
they're
Hyundai,
Hyundai,
Hyundai.
something like that.
The Sonata, but also I think was the Kia Cane 900 is I think
They're
right.
K90 or K900, and well, and its counterpart, the Genesis G70.
Yeah, I mean it's to what you said. I go every year. It's tradition, right? So that's one thing. And other years, I like going to see the brands I like, obviously, and that's where I kind of fell in love with the orange Porsche Cayenne Coupe. And as we've talked about a little bit before, but whether I'm even in the market, I also go whether I'm even in the market or not. I go mainly for four reasons. So those are the first two. Third reason is whether I'm in the market for a new car or not. I go to look at what I might buy. I currently drive a Lexus, and we always stop at Lexus to see how would I buy a new one compared to what I'm currently driving. Usually the answer is no, because I don't like some things in the cars. But at the same time, I go to look at if I needed to buy a new car, what would I want to get? So I'm shopping in a sense. And I'm also going for a fourth reason for surprises. Can someone prove me wrong, like the Discovery or the Ram or the Genesis models or the Sonata? Can I be proven wrong from what my opinions are, which in turn is kind of shopping in and of itself, right?
I didn't know
And I
that
think
Kia could build a luxury
neither did
car
I.
that is
I mean,
worthy of $70,000.
I mean, I agree. And then after the fact, I'm on the auto show high. So I'm giving my name to dealerships. I'm going to look at these cars. I'm watching YouTube videos and reading articles about these reviews and I start reforming opinions on cars. I think there's still a place for auto shows, great marketing stunts, and things like that well into the future. What those take shape as and during and after the COVID era, who really knows? But I hope manufacturers realize that there's still, even for my car nuts, petrol heads like ourselves and non-petrol, they're still useful beyond just brand recognition. And I hope we don't see them go away, frankly, or even more manufacturers pull out. I hope we see the return of those who do. That's my hot take on that.
Yeah, I agree. So,
Well, with that, I think we've gone a little long this week, but anything else you want to make reference about?
I know there were a couple of topics we did run a little long this week. I know there were a couple of topics that we didn't want to touch. So for those of you watching the video and you're seeing some of the pictures go through, um, just some quick hits. We were going to talk about the FAA's zero tolerance policy when it comes
Oh yeah.
to people not wearing masks and not paying attention to flight attendants on flights. It is worthy of note because we can't go an entire podcast without mentioning Porsche at least 4 times that
hmm
the Taycan 4S somehow gained 20 miles of range without changing anything this year. And
We'll have to see how that evolves. Frankly, with the speculations on that, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Car didn't get lighter. Nothing really changed. And yet
yeah,
interesting.
so
There's also, I think, along with the Taycan, there's a new 2021 rear wheel drive base model is coming, and it's cheaper, but still
yep.
something like 10 grand or more than the all-wheel Tesla Model S. So how will that do with it being more expensive and maybe less range than that Tesla? So a couple quick hits. Last thing I'd like to follow up on from last week, real quick,
Yep.
is we talked about the engines, the Moon SL, the Moon, the NASA launch with the engine failures that shut down after
Yes.
like a minute.
Yep.
their new moon engines or whatever called they're the SLS moon rocket. So apparently NASA, we did say we'd follow up if we found anything else. Apparently, the failure was not due to any technical components in the engine. It was basically the engines exceeded flight pro or flight what would be the word um, parameters would be the word. So essentially, they along with the test, NASA kind of basically said if it passes these thresholds with the various tests and things like that, shut down the engines for them to not ruin anything. And that's what basically happened. I think in engine two or something like that, it exceeded some of the flight programs that are some of the parameters that they had set in place. And it wasn't due to engine components that kind of failed or anything. It was just due to settings that they had in place for the test. I don't know if they're going to do another test soon here in the coming weeks or not, but it doesn't look like any components fail, which frankly is better than something actually failing in the test. So we did say we'd follow up on that, and that's all I found over the past week. So I think that's it now.
Yeah, I would say so.
That I think with that, thanks for tuning in a little bit longer this week, everybody. That brings us to the checkered flag for this week. We hope you guys enjoyed the new layout, or slightly new layout, and continued video for our video audience. If you guys have any questions or want to reach out to us with feedback, you can get to us on all social media platforms with the handle at Redline Resorts. And as always, our email is podcast@redlineresorts.com if you'd like to offer up any suggestions or ask us any questions or get involved. So, with that, I'm Matt, that's Nick, and thanks for sitting in on this show for this week. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys.